I'm sure that all here who are professors don't like to talk at the beginning of the afternoon, because normally the students are human beings and they fell asleep. So I remember having taught in a Pontifical Institute, John Paul II, with Professor Griegel, who was vice president, and myself, who was vice president afterwards, that it was difficult to make the timetables of the professors because nobody wanted to teach in the afternoon. But we can start like that. It's a new time. So I was invited before I introduce our three today's relators, to propose you a short reflection on fatherhood and motherhood. And before I begin, I would like to say a few words on the culture relativistic context that makes obscure the mystery of the genesis of the human person in the fundamental relationship of the marital bond and the parent-child relationship. In a relativistic society, partial and subjective values are exalted. An absolute conception of individual freedom, well-being in a hedonistic sense of a quest for the greatest possible pleasure, the elimination of moral ties through the transgression of taboos, and so on. In an affective sphere, it is thought that only emotional fulfillment and physical desire are constitutive of love's nature. A hard and fast separation has been created between freedom and nature, and this division contributes to the destruction of the structural and fundamental tie between marriage and the family, as well as in a relation between parents and children. There is a connection between relativism and the neglect of the natural moral law. Benedict XVI, in his address to the members of the International Theological Commission on October 5th, 2007, said in this regard, I quote, "When the fundamental requirements of human dignity, of human life, of the family institution, of a fair social order, in other words, basic human rights are at stake, no law devised by human beings can subvert the law that the Creator has engraved on the human heart without the indispensable foundation of society itself being dramatically affected." End of quotation. And so we can say that any kind of relationship is affected by the non-respect of the Creator's design. The human experience of filiation, elective relationship, bind the human being deeply. Friendship and love are a specific and more intense participation in a person's humanity because it engages one's interiority. Other kinds of relationships, especially in the family community, do have the same high request. Personally, I would like to concentrate just now and limitate myself on the specific relationship between father, mother, and children, and try to show the mystery of fatherhood from the point of view of the child. I think one possible and very helpful approach is what a father is to examine the filiation. Human filiation is discovered and lived through a dual relationship, the relationship of the child with the father and the relationship with the mother. The father and the mother help the child to discover who he is, but they are not the primary source of his personal identity. They do not choose the subject they are going to bring into the world. Parents who educate their children are somehow the servant of a precedence. Responsible fatherhood and motherhood suppose an object of previous responsibility that they recognized. If we now consider the filial experience, we see that it begins with the relationship of the small child to his parents. They are not chosen, but given. In a natural order, a man is always the son of somebody. Typically as well, the child does not choose his name, but receives from his parents or their substitutes. In most cases, he keeps his name, this name by which he has begun to be known in society, both in his origin as a member of a family or so, and in his personality, the name that designates him for close relatives and friends. The child receives what reflects his origin and personality. Man in search of his origin is necessarily sent back to a more radical origin. He is directed towards the search for an absolute paternity. We can see in the book of the Apocalypse, Revelation, the prerogative of such an absolute paternity in the fact that each of the chosen in heaven receives not only a family identity belonging to the big family of the chosen, but also his true personal identity expressed symbolically by the white stone in which is inscribed the name he alone knows. The fact that the human experience of filiation is given in both the relationship with the mother and with the father expresses the incompleteness of the experience. Human fatherhood and motherhood are complementary to the point that their roles are exercised alternately in a determining way. If the father and mother together refer their child to their human origin, and if, as we have said, this human origin points towards a more radical origin, then it is necessary to place not only paternity, but also maternity in a perspective of this origin. Motherhood must likewise be seen in reference to God's radical fatherhood. First, a filial experience in the relationship with the mother. While it's true that there are two parents in the mysterious moment of conception, one soon sees the appearance of the special role of the mother, who will become not only the instrument, but also the place of a communion of life and love, which keeps child in total dependence as it begins to exist. We can say that the body that takes shape very slowly is the fruit of this communion. Its action is truly structuring. Cells, tissues, and organs appear in mysterious order that is made physiologically possible by the mother's cells, tissues, and organs. Their growth, invisible to human eyes, occurs through the irrigation and canals, whose source is the mother, who gradually forms and prepares for life this little body that owes its substance to her. The talk about the women's right to dispose of their own body today is certainly an effective slogan, but it does not correspond in any way to the reality attested by the mother-child relationship, which involves two separate beings, two clearly identifiable bodies. The relationship with the mother is not one-directional. The fact is that the unborn child transforms his mother, preparing her for the event in which she will visibly give life. We are in the presence of a real interpersonal relationship. In the letter to families of John Paul II, of course, we find this idea of the humanizing effect of pregnancy and of the reciprocity of the mother-child relationship at this early stage. Let us also consider the gospel narrative of the visitation in Evangelist St. Luke that shows the commencing autonomy of the two children, Jesus and John the Baptist, in their mother's wombs. The child gradually learns to distance himself from his mother's body and to acquire the first elements of his autonomy. The filial experience in relation with the father figure becomes more consciously involved in the child's life. First experienced as a rival, this figure provokes the resistance of the child, who feels threatened in his security and in a relationship with his mother, who perceptibly provides this security. The father is an authority figure who begins to make the toddler perceive that his rights are not unlimited, especially with respect to his mother. He represents the first major appeal to the child's conscious freedom to consent to that authority, to accept its newly discovered legitimacy, and to recognize himself as son of this father, just as he had experienced himself effortlessly as his mother's son. The discovery of both parents through the recognition of the bond that unites them is the first necessary step in the construction of the child's personality. The roles of the parents obviously do not reach their end in those early years of the child's life, even if they acquire their most symbolic force at that time. They are the first who call him by the name they have given him, and they initiate him to his new existence by educating him for responsibility. And in this regard, they jointly represent parental authority, which is in principle is kind toward the child, who gradually learns that he will receive recompense or retribution for his voluntary acts. Gradually taught to exercise his responsibility, he will be morally structured as he accepts rules of conduct that he has not given to himself, but that he can receive only with docility and confidence. This last element, the confident attitude, is certainly the most fundamental one in the experience of filiation lived in the early years of childhood and adolescence. The child spontaneously offers his confidence to his parents because he senses that they deserve it, and because they can later show through their personal conduct that their requirements are legitimate. They are rooted in goodness, and more precisely, in a good wanted for him. The child is educated to assent. The child knows that his parents are reliable and that what they require of him, therefore, necessarily has a beneficial result for him, even if he does not understand always their scope. We can see that this experience is personalized. It allows the child to reach the true fulfillment of his potential, and first the capacity to love and to enter harmoniously into the wave of caring interpersonal relationship. It teaches him to discern good and evil. In this sense, the experience of filiation is rooted in a recognition of a prior moral good. The concrete knowledge of good itself is a mediation that allows him to perceive another source of good, a more radical source. Only and I conclude with that, only the mystery of the incarnation of the eternal Word can shed appropriate light on the desire for a full filial life, which is humanly impenetrable and impossible. We will illustrate now, if you want, briefly Jesus' human experience as Son, like every man with whom he is united by his incarnation. In his humanity, Jesus lived a double filiation in his rapport with the Virgin Mary and also Joseph. The Son of God in the flesh was the Son of Mary. Understandably, we could profitably deepen this aspect on the condition of observing that it is inscribed in the perspective of a disposition of divine providence, which must be formulated as follows. The Father gave Jesus Mary as his mother. Jesus' descent from Mary adds nothing to his filial identity, because by nature he is the eternal Son. But Mary manifests it in the flesh according to the Father's plan. This also means that Mary's motherhood also takes its name from the Father's paternity. Jesus' filiation fully integrates this disposition of God's paternal providence. Some features specify Jesus' human experience. As every child, Jesus was absolutely dependent on Mary in his flesh, and like every mother, Mary carried Jesus in her, fed him, cared for him, and together with Joseph, exercised her parental authority over him. He was obedient to them. At no time was Mary's figure an obstacle for Jesus in the accomplishment of his mission as a father and boy. Similarly, we cannot overlook Joseph's role, which was decisive. Thanks to his attention and their special care, Joseph was truly a father figure for Jesus. He saved him from Herod, educated and prepared him for a simple existence, transmitting to him the fundamental values of life in Nazareth, the dignity and sanctity of human work, respect for civil laws, the census, for instance. He led an exemplary life and, as head of the family, helped to give Jesus the healthy environment in which he was able to grow in grace and holiness. Moreover, Joseph was for Jesus the one who steps back in the presence of the Father. Of course, there is his unique act of faith, which consisted in giving credit to the words he heard in a dream. Do not fear to take Mary, your wife, into your home. But how could we not recognize in the fact that he steps into the background a special quality that makes him apt to exercise true paternity, indicating the Father to his Son, thus leading him back to his true origin. Today, there is an urgent need for a filial anthropology in which both relationships must necessarily be incorporated with the reality they carry. The radical and original filiation directed toward the Father, from whom all fatherhood takes its name. Jesus' mother was present on Calvary, and at the moment in which the salvation of the world was accomplished on the cross, and this episode represents, from the human viewpoint, a violent break, contrary to nature, of the relationship between a mother and her son. Yet, here the fact takes on a radically new meaning. She gives her son to the world for the second time in a painful but true union in Jesus' mysterious and divine mission. At that moment, Mary gives the ultimate human testimony of her fidelity as mother. She receives ability to extend her maternity to all people In just the same way, Jesus' filiation begins to be extended to all. Jesus' words sanction this extraordinary fecundity. Son, behold your mother, which now becomes a spiritual motherhood, a new begetting of faith. Tradition and the magisterium gave Mary the title Mother of Believers or Mother of the Church, recognizing her the figure of redeemed humanity. It refers to all of those who have been introduced by Christ in the Holy Spirit into the relationship of adoptive children of the Father. Therefore, it is necessary, dear friends, to keep together in the person of Jesus, his mission to make us children of the Father, and that of making us children of Mary. Mother, behold your son. These two relationships are not inscribed on the same level, of course, but if in faith one is naturally subordinate to the other, nevertheless, each one, according to its degree, implies a Christian anthropology of filiation. For those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. Thank you. And now, I introduce our three relators. The two. Just a moment. It's always the same thing, you know. Yes, you. I have today the happy task and honor for introducing our three relators. First, Professor Reverend Father Jean Laffitte from the University of Silesia in Katowice. Professor Laffitte will speak to us about the fatherhood of God. In this light, he will analyze the dramatic crisis of human fatherhood in contemporary times. He perceives in this crisis not only the syndrome of the postmodern culture, but also the source of despair which prevents seeing a child as a blessing received from God. Professor Jean Laffitte is a priest of the Archdiocese of Katowice, professor of theological sciences, poet, and journalist. He specializes in Christology, methodology of theology, theology of culture, theology of Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. And in 86 to 2008, he was associated with John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. And from 2004 to 2014, he was a member of the International Theological Commission. He's the author of 70 scientific poetry and essays books. Professor Jean Laffitte, a lei la parola.